I can tell you this, that William Samoei Ruto is a very frightened man. I think they are still shell-shocked with what Gen Z did. Still shell-shocked. But I can also tell you this, that they know they cannot solve the problem. They know that that uprising can and will come up again, because there's an underlying problem. Reject Finance Bill was but a trigger. But as you saw, even after it was rejected, people stayed on the streets because pain is still being felt. Serious economic pain. And this economic pain, unfortunately, this regime cannot solve. From the 7th of this month, there has been there have been vehicles outside my residence. The sole purpose of those vehicles, apart from surveillance, is to jam all the systems, the internet, any phone communication, sometimes satellite on and off. And they have been there until Monday this week. On Monday, they left at 4 o'clock and have not been back until this evening. So this evening, at about 6, they're back again, and they've jammed all the systems. I cannot talk from my house. I cannot take this show from my home. They are also physically surveilling me. So as I travel around the city, there is physical surveillance. Now, this is pure intimidation. There's nothing else to it. They can do all these things without being visible, but they've chosen to be visible. They've chosen to be visible because these are intimidation tactics on myself, on my family. And I think they're trying to advertise to everybody else that if we can do this to Jimmy, we can do it to each and every one of you. And I want people to take heart. This is now a regime that has decided they are not going to operate by the tenets of our constitution and democracy. In democracy, there's no room for this sort of thing. There's no room for surveillance, illegal abductions, the use of the gun. William Ruto got to power through the ballot. You cannot govern us through the bullet. This is a very unfortunate circumstance in this country. We are 60 years since independence. We have multi-party democracy. We have a new constitution, 2010. For some of you, it's not new, but it's new. It's the second constitution you have in this country. And the one thing that constitution guaranteed us was political rights. Fought very hard for those political rights. And they are anchored very well in the clear chapter on our human rights. The rights of every Kenyan, what they are due just by being a citizen. They are wasting time sending all these vehicles outside my home and following me everywhere I go. There are enough challenges. We do not pay taxes so that they so-called try and intimidate political opponents, or people who have different opinions than themselves. Those people are operating without taxes. It is our revenue that is sustaining them. NIS has a big budget. It has a 46 billion shilling budget. It is larger than even the judiciary. And to imagine that they use that to surveil opponents of William Ruto, to try and intimidate us, is a very sad state of affairs. And I want to say on this show, and I'll be very loud and clear, I'm sorry, we are not intimidated. We stand by what we have said, we stand by the truth, and we stand by the change that this country so desperately needs. These tactics were used long time ago. And if you don't mind, Redemptor and Mumbi, I would like to just give us just a short synopsis of the history of this sort of thing. In 1887, after the Berlin Conference of Otto von Bismarck to was called the Prussia Conference. A man which started what you call the Scramble of Africa. The British came to Kenya, and they came to Kenya with a company called Royal East Africa from India. And they came for three things: to come here, to extract for wealth for themselves, to exploit the inhabitants of the country, and to dominate. Those were their three goals. I call them EED. Those goals were clear, and they set up a system of doing just that. The Scramble for Africa was a premise because the Europeans were fighting so much for the little wealth they had in Europe that they decided there's a new place that has been discovered that needs to be conquered. And they felt they had some very naive natives who did not know the world, and they were going to come and conquer us and exploit us. By 1902, that company called Royal East Africa Company had become Imperial British East Africa Company. And in 1902, Kenya became a protectorate of the British government. That company, which came to exploit, which came to extract, which came to dominate, the individuals of that company in 1902 started forming themselves as the civil service of Kenya, the new protectorate under the British regime. So a company which came here to make profit suddenly became the government. The sole purpose of a company is to try and make profit. So that company which wanted to make profit decided now they are going to govern to make profit. So they became the government, they became the civil servants. And the policemen that were created at that time were the watchmen of those companies and the individuals, the settlers that had formed in 1902. The watchmen. So the watchmen were to protect them. Everybody outside was a problem, was an enemy of the people inside. That system was further embedded in 1920 when we were formally colonized by the British regime. Now, fast forward. Tell me what has changed. The civil service, the government machinery, does nothing else. It extracts from us, it exploits us, and it dominates us with their police and their security systems. We changed the white colonialist for an African colonialist that had continued the same thing. In 2010, the new constitution gave us more power to fight that dominance of extraction, exploitation, and domination of the police. But you can see, because we have been unclear about exploitation and extraction, the powers that be are still using the police, no matter what their limitations in the constitution, and the power we have as their sovereign to continually dominate us. How do we stand and sit here and talk when up until today, our freedom fighters of the recent revolution, the one that is going to change Kenya completely and absolutely, 60 plus are said to have been killed. Some figures go up to even 200. We have people being abducted. I am still alive. I'm still here. You can frustrate me with communication, but we are still moving around. We are still breathing oxygen. There are people who have died. There are people like my friend Bob Jage and the two Longton twins who came to see me in Kamkunji when I was illegally arrested. I say illegally because the police had an order saying you cannot arrest him. And they chose to ignore that order, to tell you that they are taking orders from somewhere else. We've seen the lack of accountability of our IG. Those three young men visited me in Kamkunji. And when they did, soon after, giving comfort to friends and family who were in Kamkunji outside and singing some good patriotic songs, on their way home they were abducted. This is now over 5 weeks. We don't know where they are. This is the Kenya that we are living in the year 2024. Really? Really? 2 years just after an election? So-called the most democratic election some Western observers and diplomats have stated. 2 years after? This is the Kenya? I can tell you this, that William Samoei Ruto is a very frightened man. These are the tactics of an extremely frightened human being. I think they are still shell-shocked with what Gen Z did. Still shell-shocked. But I can also tell you this, that they know they cannot solve the problem. They know that uprising can and will come up again, because there's an underlying problem. Reject Finance Bill was but a trigger. But as you saw, even after it was rejected, people stayed on the streets because pain is still being felt. Serious economic pain. And this economic pain, unfortunately, this regime cannot solve. This pain was created, and I can tell you this with a certainty. It was created 12 years ago when the two of them came to power, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and William Samoei Ruto. I did their MOU. William Samoei Ruto took the anchor of the treasury with his minister called Rotich. That is when a regime decided they are properly going to extract from us. They are going to exploit us as their Kenyans, and they are going to dominate us. And they chose to do so economically. Today, we are slaves. We are slaves to one big monster that they created called debt. And we've been trying to talk about it for the last 2 years. No matter which way you turn, as long as we do not deal with redemptor, what you call odious debt that has nothing to do with us, we are never going to solve this problem. We can talk all the things that we want to talk, but the extraction, the exploitation, and the dominance was set into place. And William Samoei Ruto knows he cannot open that can of worms because it will come to bite him. It will eat him. It will gobble him. It will swallow him. And I want to just explain primarily how they started it, because they did so unconstitutionally. They decided that the Constitution of Kenya does not work for extraction, exploitation, and dominance. And they're going to operate outside the Constitution to embed this. And we all need to come to the same page on this, because we can all go around talking, but this is where the problem is. It is the anchor of all the issues you're seeing, whether it is strikes, whether it is no projects being done, whether it is malfeasance, whether it is the hard hand of police because they have to push back somehow with their dominance, because we are sniffing at what the problem is. They know that it will gobble them and swallow them. And they did so deliberately. They did so knowingly. They did so with a very clear vision of what they wanted to achieve. And they simply started this way. They looked at chapter 12 of our Constitution, and that is called Public Finance Management. It manages the finances of the government, of us, the people. That chapter was crafted so very well because of the malfeasance that had happened prior in the old Constitution. And that chapter is simply about controls, the law on controls. You either do it, if you don't do it, you are doing an unconstitutionality, you should be in a court of law having committed a crime. Just like anybody who knows, if you have an accountant who knows accounting, you know there are certain things you do. If you're a banker, there are certain things you do. You have controls. If you go outside of those controls, you become a criminal. So way back in 2014, the government decided they are going to become criminals. They looked at Chapter 12, and it was not working for them. It did not perpetuate their interests. So they looked at a couple of chapters, articles, and they said, we're going to change them. They started with 220. 220 clearly states what a budget is. A budget shall contain the estimates of revenue and the estimates of expenditure, both development and recurrent. Two very distinct, very distinct estimates of revenue and estimates of expenditure. That is the budget of Kenya. Number two, they looked at the consolidated fund and they said that doesn't work for them. It's Article 206. It says all revenue of government. When I say all revenue, it's tax revenue, debt revenue, that is considered revenue when we take debt, must enter the consolidated fund, apart from two things, A and B. If there is a fund created by Parliament, such as the development, such as the petroleum development levy, or B, if A and A, if an MDA, what is called Ministry, Department, or Agency of Government, makes extra money on its own, it can keep that money. Those are the first two. Let me start with those before I go to the last one. So you come to the budget, estimates of revenue and estimates of expenditure. The estimates of revenue clearly state the following. All the tax revenue that the government is anticipating to collect, and from where. So for example, stamp duty must be there. Passenger levy tax of the airport must be there. Traffic offenses, taxes must be there. Now, any income from traffic offenses estimated, and so on. So you list all the revenue the government is expecting to collect. And the basis of this is that your revenue should equal your expenditure. All right? Because the makers of our constitution envisaged a balanced budget. All that is collected in tax revenue should be able to take care of all our needs of expenses. But it also says in subsection 2 of that particular article, that if there's any deficit, in other words, any shortage, it should also be listed. In other words, any shortage, any deficit, any debt must also be listed in the revenue estimates. So if for example, there is a shortage between revenue and expenditure, then if you are going to borrow, you must list it on the revenue estimates that are tabled before Parliament. Now, that is the Constitution of Kenya.